Hello, my friend. So I thought it was time to sit down and break down the items and kind of how the stat system works in this game. For a lot of people who come from typical MMOs, looking at this stat system, your eyes just kind of glaze over, to be honest with you, because for the most part, most stats don't matter. And that kind of happens here, but you get a choice on what stats you want to keep. So I'm going to break down everything top to bottom that I understand about the item system, and maybe I've missed some parts to it or you have any other questions. If that's the case, feel free to leave me a question in the comment, or feel free to come join my server. I'm on Jade Coast and I'm on the East continent. You are more than welcome to add me in game or come join my clan, Chimeracorp. We are always looking for more people. We don't really do anything, but you're welcome to join. All right, so we're going to start from the top, looking at an item that I hold near and dear to my heart, because this is kind of how I figured all this out once this item started coming together. So every weapon has a tier. Every weapon and armor all have tiers that define one part of the weapon, and that is the base stat. Your attack and armor pierce on a tier 10 heavy sword will be better than a tier 9 heavy sword every single time. To even demonstrate this is a tier 9. Almost all of the weapons maintain the same attack and armor pierce across the different tiers in the same form. So this one's 430, 69, and it's a tier 9 handgun. The Pipa is a tier 9 Pipa, and it is 430 and 69 as well. But then go to the tier 10 greatsword that I have, and it's 470 and 84. I think you get the point. So each of these tiers holds a minimum power, and this minimum power will just mean that as a baseline, that weapon is better. It probably comes from the attack and armor pierce. There are other parts aside from the attributes underneath that can also influence this a little bit. But the key point is, if you have a higher tier, you should always be using that highest tier. And I'll explain why here in just a second. I'm sure you've gotten a tier 10 item that is a lower power than your tier 9, whatever you're already wearing, and you scoffed and were sad and hopefully didn't throw it in the refiner. So as we look down here, an item will have item attributes. Each of these attributes is going to take up something I will refer to as a stat slot. And certain items will have more stat slots than others. I am honestly not sure how this works, because I have some of my armor which has multiples, but then I go to my tier 11 and it has a one less stat slot. And so I'm not sure how this system works, but just know that each of these slots is important to understand. The reason they're important to understand is because on each of these stats, they individually roll their own rarity. As you can see on this one, I have blue armor pierce at 114, blue crit at 67, and purple attack at 162. If we look at one of my other weapons, I've got more blue, but there's also a green one here. It can roll all the way down to white. And if you look at certain items you'll find in the world, you'll notice that the higher tier they are, the more likely they are to have the purple and blue stats on them. So as you go up in your rarities, you might see some stats that you just really want. Unfortunately, I got this Impure Plum Shuriken, which is a tier 9, which is okay. I'm not a big fan of the shurikens, but it has a damage bonus percentage of 3.83%. I would kill to have that on just about any other weapon. When you have these stats, you can move them between two weapons of the same type. So in these attributes, each attribute will roll a rarity, which defines its stat range. That rarity can then also roll an enhanced feature, which increases its amount of stats up to the maximum amount it could be before the next tier. As you can see with these, bonus damage enhanced blue, if compared to a purple, would be very close. It'd be very similar. So you're always wanting to look and get these enhanced stats because they will give you more overall. It's not a huge difference, but each stat that you can trade out on these through the reforge mechanic, you can kind of take along with you. So as you go up in tiers, if you see stats that are higher or give you more power than the ones you have on there, and you decide you want to do that, you can continuously move this over. So for instance, I'm looking at this chest piece right here. Say I got another chest piece and it didn't have, it had like a green attack on it, or it had a blue bonus damage, but it wasn't enhanced. I can take this stat with the reforge page and move it over to the new armor. What this means is that since it displays the amount of power that it changes you with, It doesn't exactly give you a clear-cut answer if it's good or not. It just knows it's this strong. I'm going to put some numbers up here on the screen. These are the numbers that the different stats weigh in power. So effectively what can happen is if you are stacking crit and resilience, but using something like a multi-expo, you will absolutely find yourself unable to do any damage at all. These guns, or this bow, does not scale off of crit. Replacing an attack stat with defense of the same value will be more power, but your character will do less damage. So you could quite literally have stats that offer you no real power just because the reforge mechanic said it would be more power mathematically. So while your character gains in strength, they're not gaining in destructive power. So what does all of this mean? It basically means instead of gathering armor, you're gathering a tier of armor in which you can constantly keep your eye out through all the various ways you get gear in this to see these good stat rolls and then move it over to yours. Due to the durability system, you're eventually going to have to anyway, but because when items break, they don't get destroyed, you can very easily move those same stats over to an equivalent piece of gear. Yeah, it's going to cost you a little bit of calories, but it's a better solution than that piece is just gone forever. The other side of this is that because people are just looking to improve their power to hit these different roadblocks or to keep up with the leaderboards that are just insane, they will do whatever it takes to increase that number, thereby hamstringing themselves when it comes to the actual time to go to fight. They will be a complete liability at 30,000 power because they have nothing but resilience and crit and are using some little crossbow thing that has no benefit from that whatsoever. There are also conditional effects that fall into the same attribute category that are heavily weighted for power. Be mindful that most require high HP or stamina, which are frequently not where they need to be to have that stat activated. Even doubly so, sometimes those are percent increases for stats like range damage taken. So it would like reduce damage by 2%, but it's worth the same amount of power as like almost 100 armor pin, which is very powerful overall. Once you have the best stats on your main gear, it's also a great time to just start chucking it into the refiner itself to get those re-rolled gear pieces. Now, I didn't realize this initially. I was just always looking at the power and like, oh, that's good or bad. What you're actually doing is getting another chance at stat rolls. You are effectively shoving these pieces in there that you've ripped the stats you want off of them on and getting a new piece of gear with a chance at better stats than the ones you had. I wasted so much by just throwing those right back in the refiner to fuel more stuff. I didn't understand why it would do that because it just didn't feel all that great. But now that I understand how to improve it, I'm sure I threw away some purple rolls on some of those gear pieces that were a little bit more up there, and it makes me very sad. This can kind of all snowball into you having like the quote unquote perfect set of stats, where say you had a piece with 4 purple stats that you had maniacally pulled off of every piece of gear you could find. That won't go away. You'll get the next tier up, and I can almost guarantee you won't have better stat rolls on it because of the way the stat rolls work. And so you could just move them over. And yeah, it might be a little expensive, but once more, it's just calories, and you can get plenty of those if you try. So it's just these good rolls roll into better and better and better gear, which in the long run makes it easier for you to stay at a high power level. And a bad piece of high tier gear isn't a deal breaker when you can just put the stats from your last piece on it and have a net power increase anyway. Just make sure every time you get a piece of gear, just check the attributes. Nothing else matters. If it's not higher tier, if it's not higher anything than whatever you're using, or it's not an applicable type to something you're using, then whatever, you can just always see if there's decent stats on it and go on with life. It is all fuel for the refiner. Even if you take those stats off, it still gives you the same amount. Your tier defines the amount of refining points that you get. So the higher the tier, the more you're going to get. And that when you first get to your refiner or rare plus and it's a 5,000, it feels so intimidating. But by the time it matters again, it's nothing. don't worry about your power thresholds at all. It wasn't worth it at all. I finally hit the 25,000 mark and went and did the Grand Beast. I think it was the Dinosaur Grand Beast one that required 25,000 power, and I couldn't do any damage. I didn't die. I was very tanky, which explains why I didn't do any damage. But my whole team did the same thing. And so we did 0 damage, even though we were able to survive his barrage of attacks. It just didn't matter. That was what kind of was the catalyst for this. So keep in mind that increasing your power is great, but if you sacrifice your literal power and damage, you're just going to have a bad time and you're going to hit a wall that was never meant to be there. Or who knows, maybe I'm not giving enough credit to the developers. Maybe this is the wall of knowledge you need to attain to have decent gear and start taking on noble beasts. Armor pin is probably going to be a best in slot stat because of how many beasts have high armor and how many of the weapons just rely on you being able to cut through that. I think the Pipa is inherently really powerful right now because it does not require armor pin versus some of the other weapons. But I think as people begin to understand itemizing for their explicit weapons that they have, I think it will become a very mediocre weapon. I think if you get enough armor pin, the fast hitting weapons will probably tear everything apart. But you're going to have to get some serious armor pin to make those quick attacks go through all that armor. Percent increases on your armor are good if you pick one and you focus on it. If you've got like 1% range damage increase, 1% melee damage reduction, 1%, it's not a big, it's just like random stats. It's not really going to do anything for you. But if you take the time to kind of coordinate your gear and get similar percent increases, it can really benefit you. Like I showed earlier, there was a percent damage on this shuriken. I would love to stack on anything else. 4% damage. That's nuts. Can you imagine if I could get that on multiple pieces of gear? That could add up to 10% just from 3 pieces. That's wild. Something to think about if you want to try other ways to increase your power. Some of the conditionals will increase a stat by a percentage, making that stat better just by default for you. Keep this in mind if you're like heavily on the armor pin side and you see something that will increase that. Make sure that you always are gearing towards your strengths. And last but not least, your overall power will take your highest equipped weapon. So keep that in mind if you've got one that's just way far above everything else. Like I have a rifle that's a 3200. I don't have anything else close to that right now. So when I put that on, my power jumps up by quite a chunk. And that can be deceptive when you're queuing up for things. Remember, like I said, don't really go for those thresholds. Go to do what you can do and increase your gear, and it'll happen with time no matter what. All right, I think that's about all I've got for the item system and the way the stats work. I really genuinely think this system is great because you can move the stats around. Instead of going for a piece of gear, a particular best in slot, I can get best in slot stats. The only thing I don't like is I've discovered that some of them have less stat slots than others, and like my mask has 4, which is great. My ring has 4, or 5, which is even better. And I don't know if that's just a feature of the ring, or the shoulders only have a certain amount, or this tier 11 only rolled with 3 stat slots, which makes it inherently worse. But if there is a case where multiple stat slots work, the one with the most slots will always have more power potential than the one with less, because you just get more stats. But if you're still here, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. I haven't uploaded more videos because I am hopelessly addicted to this, but there's more coming. Don't you worry. Have a good night.